We're normal, sane, rational people trying to tell you that this is wrong.
A vast homosexual influence in popular shows. Considering the dramatic influx of homosexual themes in modern television, it should come as no surprise that there might appear gay subtext in a few TV shows. Even shows designed for children.
Further evidence that the creators of this series intended for the character to be a gay role model have surfaced. He's purple, the gay pride color, and his antennae is shaped like a triangle, the gay pride symbol. These subtle depictions are no doubt intentional, and parents are warned to be alert to these elements of the series. Parents alert, Tinky Winky comes out of the closet.
Hello, I'm Mr. Saint, and I'm here to answer one very simple question. What is love? And what does it look like?
Well, so it goes that after suffering a childhood in the 90s and early 2000s, the apparent peak of liberal Marxist homosexual propaganda, we're left with a veritable slew of family programs with forced LGBTQ diversity, which of course explains why the world is now being flooded with the gays and transgenders and communists, right? I mean, that's what we heard all through that period, that the liberal culture war had gone too far, that TV was being crammed full of this kind of dangerous pandering nonsense. All of this in mind, it stands to reason that if I'm looking through my childhood programming of that 90s, 2000s period of Dexter's Lab, Johnny Bravo, SpongeBob, Recess, and Yvonne of the Yukon, that I'll have plenty of examples of this overt, positive LGBTQ representation to have to worm my way through. Why, I'll hardly even be able to fit it all in. The punchline is that, in spending the last week or so coming through this period in which my small impressionable child's mind was being corrupted by the influence of liberal media, it's actually painfully difficult to find any examples of this stuff. For the apparent victory of the left in that period of the culture war, gay and transgender issues are basically just punchlines in near on every example I could find looking into the subject.
It turns out our Mrs. is a mister.
It's like a bloke kissing another bloke and, that's so gross, and that's the joke. Or it's a bloke dressing as a woman and then blokes find him attractive and, that's so gross, and that's the joke. Is that what we've been confusing for genuine positive representation all this time? Can't imagine how that kind of mix-up would affect people's mindsets in the present day.
Are traps gay?
But hey, I figured, since it seems to be a foregone conclusion for so many that leftist children's media dominance is a massive factor in our modern political struggles, it'd be worth a deeper look, and I was able to identify 3 distinct categories worth looking at if we really want to answer the question, where was all this stuff that apparently brainwashed me? So while it's hard to find specific examples of network rules blocking the depiction of gay, lesbian, bisexual, trans, queer people in children's media in this era, the colloquial phrase "getting past the censors" was still pervasive throughout the period, and usually covered the more broad area of inoffence. For indeed, the liberals may have won the culture war of the 90s and early 2000s, but maybe not so much in the sense of pushing socially liberal views down our throats, and more in the sense that they wanted to cause as few people to be upset by anything as possible. It's not the conservative vanguard that brought about stuff like the Comics Code Authority, which from the 50s to the 90s specifically prevented any sexual perversion from being shown in comics.
That means gay people.
Instead, it's the liberal capitalist mindset of, you can kinda do what you wanna do, but if it might upset parents, upset the bottom line, feel free to quietly quash anything that might be remotely controversial, like putting in black people or gay people or Kirby holding a chainsaw. And thus we get the vast majority of quote-unquote gay representation through this, the ambiguous gay.
For you, darling. Oh, don't you look precious?
And yes, it's pretty much exclusively going to be gay we're dealing with here.
But what about trans stuff?
Yeah, I'm just still looking. So what is the ambiguous gay? Well, simply put, it's any time a character is written in a show in such a way that they seem gay, be it through a stereotypically camp demeanor,
let the feast begin!
a preference for girl things, and the implication that maybe they're a little more interested in playing for the home team. Crucially, however, it's never actually said or shown that they're gay. The red guy in Cow and Chicken, the king and queen of cheese, certainly seems to be playing on some classic archetypes. Eugene from Hey Arnold sure does love ponies, unicorns, ballet and musicals. Carl from Johnny Bravo really seems to love pretending to be Johnny's wife and feeling up the goods. But no, none of these characters are ever explicitly given a same-sex romantic partner, nor declare themselves to really be what the writers are implying. Time Squad featured a full episode in which Larry 3000, the effeminate robotic sidekick of Team Captain Tud Russell, gets awful jealous on seeing the leader head off with an old lover.
Don't touch me! Tonight, you're sleeping on the sofa!
Yet, despite a few wink nods, none of this really goes beyond jokes at Larry's expense, and future episodes continue to treat this relationship as a couple of love-hate bros. It's the kind of side-eye acknowledgement that, usually, at least manages to get angry parents off the network's back. Although, hey, SpongeBob was repeatedly protested as a kind of gay indoctrination for his apparent sissy demeanor, and he's like an asexual sponge. In any case, you hopefully see what I'm getting at here. If you saw a gay kid on a kids show in the 90s and 2000s, doubtless it was going to be, at best, the kind of gay you could just play off as being different. Far from the flood of diversity feared, it was just lads like Double D and Ed and Eddie, blowing kisses and writing Valentine's cards for his best pals the Eds, but haha, it's just a joke and we'll give him an implied female love interest later on anyway. And everyone's radar was going off for this one. Now, it's not unheard of for characters written like this to eventually transcend this trope, but it's always with caveats. Ren and Stimpy transitioned from wink nod haha gay joke to an actual couple, but only specifically in their adult-oriented special, and Steven Universe got a whole lot more overtly gay with its main cast over time. But, you know, that was like 2 years ago, and also got edited out in some countries. Now, what's wrong with the ambiguous gay? Seems like the best of both worlds, eh? You get some pseudo-gay representation, but parents feel less like they're having an agenda forced down their throats. Well, firstly, no, it doesn't really stop the barrage of complaints about gay kid indoctrination.
And this has to do with making anyone who's opposed to homoerotic behavior into a bad guy, the same way that Hollywood makes bad guys. I think a good illustration of this is Star Wars. Luke Skywalker is a sniveling, lousy hero. He's a constant complainer. I mean, it's just, he's a crybaby. Hollywood, though, what did they do? How did they make you cheer for Luke Skywalker? Well, the opening scene of Darth Vader is him, like, force choking some guy to death for making a mistake. So by default, Luke is the hero. And no matter how bad the other guy is, and vilify every representation of anybody who disagrees with homosexual behavior.
As I said, even explicitly asexual characters got a litany of concerned calls whenever they behaved in a way deemed off in terms of typical heteronorm behavior. Remember the framework of this video, that somehow this era was still seen as one of a liberal attack on sex and gender. But the main problem is that, for the most part, being a punchline does not good representation make, and the performance of queerness being played off this way, almost exclusively, for over a decade, isn't really the kind of positive message you might want to send to queer kids looking for something to make them feel less abnormal. In fact, quite to the contrary, the framing of behaviour like this as innately comical or weird perpetuates just the opposite for youngsters, reaffirming the playground notion of gay behaviour as something to be mocked and derided. It's quite literally programming these kids to associate this group of people with this behaviour, and that behaviour with, as I say, a punchline. Now, the LGBTQ+ community has traditionally done a fantastic job co-opting these kinds of characters, turning their energy and flamboyance into something empowering even if it comes from a place of mockery, but this doesn't quite melt away the inherent issues of this being the only way this group got to be presented to younger audiences for long periods of time.
Homework, weirdo!
Lindsay Ellis did a good video about this, by the way. Reframing gay from being something internal to simply a behaviour also helps push that whole "it's just a choice" thing, and I can't help notice that it was this exact period that phrases like "that's gay," "stop acting gay" were being fired back and forth all through youth groups at the time. The ambiguous gay, in essence, cultivates an idea of gay as a performance, not simply, well, having romantic interest in people of the same sex. And while, again, the performance is something that can be reclaimed, can even be used to create a unifying, empowering group identity,
a flame that lights the night, a flame that shadows the darkness.
It's observable the harm it can do to queer kids when this is pretty much all they get. Well, except for that one other thing.
Hey, you know Hagrid?
Yeah?
He's actually transgender.
This lady, this man, this fellow, this wizard, this talking alien robot. What do they all have in common? Yes, that's right. They're all flaming homosexuals.
The word of gay is another means of getting past those pesky parents, as ingenious as it is completely missing the point of why representation matters. Again, the priority here is making sure that in watching these shows, these kids are made to feel less like others in society and more a part of it. As over time we've learned that queerness isn't just a choice you can discourage people away from, the game instead is to acknowledge in media that these groups are a fact of society. We do need to live amongst each other, and that doesn't need to be an antagonistic relationship. If the ambiguous gay isn't the solution, pigeonholing gays to a single aesthetic punchline while still being too overt for parents,
Judy Garland!
then how about this? The character doesn't necessarily act too gay, and we still won't say they're gay in the story itself, but we will say, off the record, that they are secretly gay. Most famous example of this is probably Albus Dumbledore in the Harry Potter novels. A character author J.K. Rowling had supposedly planned from the start to be homosexual, but apparently due to an archaic rule in UK law blocking novels with gay characters from being in school libraries, how's that for the liberal culture war? Sort of let that one slip by until after the books had been published. This is actually a surprisingly common tactic. Paul Dini, co-creator of the Batman character Harley Quinn, has long been open about the character being bisexual, despite that never being made overt in the animated series. And Gem creator Christy Marks stating several of the characters had been planned to have a gay reveal down the line. I think her recent reboot fixes this, I'm not sure. Now you can kind of see where they're coming from here. It almost seems kind of progressive, right? Look at that. Turns out gay people are just people after all. It's not about acting gay. You might not even know they're gay if they don't specifically say so. And I'm sure it's certainly more appealing to the kind of people that say, I don't hate gay people, I just don't want them shoved in my face. So the question arrives, what part of a character explicitly having a romantic preference is shoving it in your face? Is it shoving in your face when a TV show shows a boy having a crush on a girl? Eric Taxon did a good video about this, by the way. The principle of just don't shove it in my face relies on the presumption that being gay is abnormal, not just in terms of it being statistically rare, but being qualitatively different from being straight. Simply put, nobody says foreigners are being shoved in their face when a German kid shows up in Bart Simpson's classroom, even though that's easily as rare as a gay kid showing up. Now, if that kid is explicitly a Muslim or a Mexican immigrant, well, then some people start to take issue, and it's for the same reason people get upset when a character is stated to be gay. Because they're not uncomfortable with featuring gays as statistical minorities, they don't want it to be normalised. And that's why the word of gay isn't really enough, because it normalises nothing. Having a character who's gay, bi, pan, or whatever else only by the word of the creators is fundamentally the same as just having them be straight. You're portraying queerness as something to be hidden, something that doesn't get to be in the open like a normal romantic preference. It's still othered, just in a less overt way than with the gay as punchline. Now, as with the ambiguous gay, I don't necessarily think every example of this is negative, and I do see the positives in having non-explicit portrayals of sexuality. But it, again, isn't a replacement for actual representation. Whether it be gays, lesbians, transgender people, or anything else, you can't normalize something unless you directly acknowledge it.
What about trans stuff?
If a gay falls in the woods and no one's there to hear it,
when shows of this era did decide to really push the boat out and directly acknowledge the gay epidemic, it was usually through what we might call the issue episode.
Well, let's see. Tuesday is leather night, so it's probably some sort of shoe outlet.
Of the three types of representation I've gone into, it's probably the most helpful. Like, it does directly acknowledge the existence of queer people, but it still comes with it a fair few problems.
No, Mark's gay.
This was also easily the rarest to encounter as a young 90s lad, so to really discuss it I have to push more into the territory of stuff that wasn't technically for kids but you probably watched it as a kid anyway. Case in point, The Simpsons.
Listen carefully. John is a sexual.
This episode, Homophobia, is symbolic of most of the benefits and problems of the queer issue episode. The show starts with Bart accidentally busting the gas line, forcing the family to pinch some pennies together to pay for a replacement. They head to a collectible store hoping to sell off some of Marge's old family heirlooms, and there they meet John. John is a fun, charismatic employee of the store, and him and Homer hit it off immediately. Until, shock horror, it turns out John is a fruit. Homer, who apparently is homophobic, thereby declares John is no longer welcome in the house, and the rest of the episode is about Homer dealing with his own irrational fears of gay people, as well as realizing John isn't so bad after all. The episode is actually more about Homer dealing with his own fragile sense of masculinity, rather than about gay people, which incidentally is how most of these queer issue episodes go. Hey, did you know that the gay guy in this episode was played by Dan Castellaneta, the same person who does the voice for Homer? I don't really have a point here, I just thought it was a funny coincidence. Now, good points to the angle adopted by episodes like this one. In directly confronting the issue of homophobia, it's a lot harder to ignore the positive message the show is trying to communicate. And if you are a queer kid watching, then you know this is a message of acceptance for you, and you're not just a punchline. This does also get parents a lot more riled up, of course, but that's why it's mostly exclusive to more adult-oriented shows. Disadvantages. Well, the framework of the issue episode in itself presents some problems, because it essentially compartmentalizes queer people, putting them in this box in which they can be dealt with and quickly discarded. John never appeared in a Simpsons episode prior to this one, and had only a couple background cameos following it. His existence is essentially compartmentalized within the framing of an episode about gay people, not just acknowledging him as a gay person, but having him be defined entirely by that. And while it's hardly rare for Simpsons side characters to be defined by singular character traits, in John's case, his quirk means he'll never really get to be integrated into this town, despite in-universe living there. John is a walking PSA that The Simpsons is okay with openly gay people, in small amounts. It's kind of a weird meta-joke moment when halfway into this episode, John has an awkward encounter with the other Simpsons gay, Smithers. A character granted a place as an uncontroversial mainstay of the cast by his sexual ambiguity at the time.
And don't you Simpsons casuals tell me him being gay was already explicit. The writers specifically said that he was a burnsexual until showing him to be gay in season 22, episode 11, and then not actually having him come out of the closet until season 27, nearly 20 years after this episode.
Sheesh. And so it goes that gay people in these shows are essentially treated like, I don't know, drug PSAs. They show up, there's a pithy platitude about acceptance and togetherness, and then they're put back in the box, like a particularly garish Christmas decoration. As we move forward, we do start to finally see more mainstream examples of openly gay primary cast members in shows, most famously Jack from Will and Grace and Ellen from Ellen. But they're rare to find, and at this point we're moving well outside of the kids show focus and also shows I've actually watched. So yes, it's time. It's time for me to address that question that's been playing on your minds the entire time. The thing that's made you go, why does he keep saying LGBTQ+ when he's only talking about gay stuff? It's finally time to reveal, in all my research, was there ever a real, explicit, positive mainstream kids show episode about transgender people? Kinda?
And who are we to deny him surgery that will make him feel better about himself?
No, fucking... God, no.
Now she's wagging her tails, 'cause you're petting her scales and kissing her slimy lips.
I don't expect most of you to remember much from this early 2000s Disney Channel show by Recess creators Joe and Solar B here and Paul Germain, a modestly successful show that ran for 4 seasons before an abrupt cancellation. Their previous show kinda stole the thunder, and yeah, it was also a great show, but man, this is a good show. Bunch of weird, cool alien species. They opted to make one of those weird aliens the main character instead of just the boring human. They seem to basically live on a commune guided by a strong female ship captain mom, and it's got a fair few good moral lessons. More people should talk about Lloyd in Space. While we're at it, talk more about Fillmore too. What was I saying? Oh right. Lloyd in Space is the first good example of gender issues handled in kids television in my childhood, and maybe the reason why I somewhat understood gender fluidity from a fairly young age. So while most episodes of Lloyd in Space deal with the titular Lloyd and his 3 friends getting in various hijinks and drama aboard their space station home, Season 2, Episode 9, Neither Boy Nor Girl, is a pretty special case. Lloyd and company are enjoying lunchtime and a new rock CD when they get into a spat with their girl classmate counterparts over musical tastes. Girls are listening to a way better song, but they fight about it, which is better anyway, and decide to call in an impartial observer. New exchange student, Zoit. Zoit, on being asked, is indecisive, recognising the emotional vulnerability of the girls' song and the raw power of the boys, and then leaving. Then, this happens.
Aha! See? He likes our music better. Hey, what are you talking about? Zoid isn't a boy.
And she liked our music better.
Whoa, wait 1 second. Not a boy? What, you think he's a girl?
Well, isn't it obvious?
Things sort of develop from there, with the boys and the girls tailing Zoid to see if they can note down anything to determine their gender. All to no avail, they give up and decide to just buy Zoid a big gulp and check which bathroom they go into. Turns out Zoid don't work that way, and they spill the beans that they just need to answer the gender question. Zoid laughs and reveals...
I thought you knew. I'm neither.
It turns out Zoid's race's culture doesn't have an assigned gender. They get to choose whatever they want to be once they hit puberty, and Zoid's birthday isn't until the following week. While Zoid is completely indifferent to the apparent gravity of this choice, it weighs heavily on the minds of the boys and girls. They each decide they want, nay, need, to win Zoid over to their respective genders, with a series of increasingly arbitrary, stereotypical gendered activities. Eventually, enough is enough, and Zoid confronts the groups over trying to manipulate them like this. Zoid storms off, and Lloyd and company try to make up for it by getting Zoid an apology gift. Still not quite getting the point, they give Zoid some girl gifts, to show that they don't want to pressure them to be a boy if they don't want. While the girls make the exact same fumble and get Zoid some, boy stuff. Zoid steps away and educates some shitlords.
Pushing me and pulling me, back and forth. Be a boy, be a girl. Well, I've had it.
Kai, we were only trying to help you make the right decision.
The right decision for you, maybe, but what about me? It'll be the toughest decision of my life, but it's my decision, not yours. And if you guys really are my friends, it shouldn't matter to you if I'm a girl or a boy, because either way, I'll still be me. See you tomorrow.
Zoid leaves, and a day later, it's finally time to decide what they want to be. After all the dramatic build-up, Zoid finally reveals...
I decided I'm not telling.
What? But why not?
not? Because it's none of your business.
So there we have it. A 2002 Disney Channel kids show managed to get a full 20 minutes on gender politics and fluidity. It's not only genuinely the only good example of this stuff really openly being discussed, but it actually holds up better than you'd think for the time. As at least a basic introduction to the notion of gender as something other than a fixed, predetermined role, it was pretty valuable to me as a kid who had never personally dealt with any of these kinds of issues before. And the episode firmly takes Zoid's side, doesn't present them as unstable, confused, or misguided like issues of gender would continue to be shown in popular media. And they're not a punchline, they're just a regular, likeable kid. And in fact, it's the obsession with the gender binary shown by Lloyd and company that's made out to be the problem here. Now, is it perfect? Fuck no. This shit's 2 decades old and comes from a Disney Channel show. It uncritically associates particular activities as inherently male or female coded. Zoid doesn't even particularly humour the notion of something that exists outside of man and woman, and it has just the same problem as the Simpsons episode in that Zoid pops up as an issue to be confronted and never turns up again to my knowledge. Yet still, as a stepping stone, as a first glimpse at a whole range of discussion that I wouldn't have really find myself involved in again until my late teens, it was a pretty valuable thing for me to stumble upon. It doesn't even directly deal with transgender issues specifically. Zoid doesn't transition, but is only shown as fluid. But it still presented me as an 8-year-old with that initial knowledge that helped me fill in the gaps when I was suddenly forced to deal with it as I grew older. Fuck if my family was really equipped to discuss that stuff, or if the school system was going to touch that topic with a 10-foot pole. And remembering this, not only because there isn't really any talk of it online, is what first inspired me to make this video. Because, look man, you can call it liberal brainwashing, you can call it pandering or shoving politics into kids' shows, indoctrination or whatever else. But I've hopefully demonstrated, pretty definitively, that no, this was not a period of some flood of positive LGBT youth representation. It was actually in many ways just as misguided as the previous decade or so in how it handled any of this stuff for young people. But what was there, what did manage to directly acknowledge these issues, was actually pretty valuable. Look, I'm not pinning everything on parents here. Most of them were barely educated on this stuff themselves. School boards were hesitant to address more than they absolutely had to, and were biting a bullet even doing that. Now, I don't think media by any stretch should be a replacement for real education on a subject. But the fact is, so many kids were lost during this period, and at least getting these concepts really openly introduced to them in some of their early popular media may have helped some of these kids out there feel a little less alone, a little less utterly confused about themselves and those around them. The fact is, for me, I'm a straight cisgender dude. I've done a lot of soul searching, I think I'm comfortable being sure about that. So I know that in my heart, I will never truly understand many of these struggles. And if I wasn't explicitly educated about it one way or another, I was never even going to begin to get it. Now class, I actually was working class, very, so I feel like that's an experience I can speak to personally. But for sexuality, for gender, for that I rely on what I'm told and what I consume. And I'm here to say, no. I didn't gain this basic understanding through some seedy queer children indoctrination. I got it in spite of anything even beginning to resemble that, almost exclusively, because whatever imagined flood of representation apparently swept across the 90s and 2000s, I must have missed it. And apparently I'm not alone, because none of the people around my age I asked had many examples beyond those I've discussed either. And the fact that we're only just starting to get there now, after decades of increased understanding about these topics and the reality that they can't just be these boogeymen problems we can hide from kids, that's pretty depressing. The fact that Dumbledore in the new Fantastic Beasts film is still not going to be explicitly gay, for one reason or another, or the fact that it's only now we're getting a non-straight main cast member in a Disney movie. That's not the best. But I guess at least this stuff is happening now. At least now we're getting stuff like Adventure Time and Steven Universe and Summer Camp Island that's showing this stuff to not be this shameful thing that needs to be hidden or treated like a punchline. I guess it's encouraging to see us step in the right direction. Just let's not start acting as if this was always the case as it becomes more of a norm, right? Because when we were kids, this was our propaganda.
It turns out our Mrs. is a Mr.
Hey, thanks again to all you for watching. I hope you got something out of that. Of course, as usual, I'd love to read your reactions and responses in the comment section below, or directly over on my Twitter. Incidentally, that's also where I post updates for videos, so follow me to keep updated. If you enjoy the video, hit subscribe to see more as it comes out. Hit the bell button to actually see when it comes out, and throw me a buck or two on Patreon if you want to keep this channel going. I also accept coffee for one-time donations, although that money will be spent on eggnog, not coffee. As far as patrons go, holy shit, we got a lot of names this time. I'd like to thank Alba, Alex Wenberg, Bira Yer, Jordan Hoxie, Kristen Roars, Michael Q. Warnock, Peter Coffin, Quefi Wergt, and Raisha Jairus, with a massive extra thanks to Evie Rosk, Letier, and Nick Schwartz. For all your support, I can't thank you all enough. Other than that, same as always, love you all and stay safe.